Today's topic is...
how to fill a table full of terrain quick, cheap, and easy.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to Waypan. I'm Cal.
And I'm Sunny.
Today we're going to be going over every single different type of terrain you can have in 40k, and we're going to be going over how to make them cheap, quick, and easy.
And for your own reference, we'll be following the types of terrain listed in this community post.
This terrain will be made specifically for 40k, but can be used universally.
And between each terrain, we will show you some of our shots to show how we got some of the things that we use, like...
homemade texture paste or Calador's creme.
graded sand.
Homemade wash.
And so on.
You can do this whole project in a day.
But the biggest thing that will slow you down is dry time.
So watch this video through and do them in stages.
Work on multiple terrain pieces at the same time so that when one thing is drying, you can work on something else.
Alright, are you ready to go over every single piece of terrain, starting with craters?
The first thing you'll be starting with is circular cork coasters, or cork hot pot stands.
You could also use a circular craft board.
Next, you'll want to use spackle or a multi-purpose filler and create a ring around the edge of the coaster. And spackle will have trouble sticking to cork, so you want to use your finger to smooth the spackle over the edge of the coaster.
Next, grab some cork scraps.
If you're starting from scratch, start with the woods project first, because you'll get lots of scraps from doing that one.
Use larger cork scraps first and then plan out around them.
Make sure to insert the cork bits on an angle so that it creates the illusion of an explosion. Next, you also want to make sure that the spackle is strongly adhered to the shard so that when it dries, it doesn't fall off.
Next, get your homemade texture paste in a brown variety, put it in the center of this crater and spread it around. This will be the end of stage 1. Put this off to dry somewhere else and move on to your next terrain project in the meantime.
Next, use the homemade texture paste in a gray variety and paint this over the cork shards and let that dry. This will conclude stage 2.
Now that both textures have dried, get some craft paint and make a dry brush color for both the brown and the grey.
You want the color to be lighter than the brown and the grey that you used in the texture paste.
You're going to be extremely aggressive with this dry brush, much more aggressive than you would usually be, and that's because of the next step. This is the end of stage 3. Leave it to dry.
And this won't take long at all.
It is important to have this dry for the next step because the next step is an overall black wash.
This concludes stage 4. Leave it to dry.
Your next step is to reapply those dry brushes, but not nearly as aggressively, because that aggressive dry brush will give some depth to your model. That's your craters done, but you can do additional things to bring out some extra flavor with them. For example, you could use grey tile grout to make this area look like it's been more damaged during a city fight.
These methods are universal, and you can theme these craters however you like.
Next,
how to make texture paste.
Or Calador's creme.
Stop paying too much for texture paste.
Introducing Calador's cream.
You only need 3 items: PVA glue, grated sand, and craft paint.
Don't know how to get grated sand? We've got a short on that too.
Mix together your medium grade and medium fine grade sand together. This will give you the approximation of regular texture paste.
You can mix different varieties of sand to get different appearances. Get your PVA and mix in until creamy.
Get some craft paint, mix it in, and get the color of your choice.
And it's that simple. That's all you have to do. That's Calador's cream.
3 easy steps and you'll never have to buy texture paste again. Next is
Rubble.
Rubbles and craters have the exact same rules, so just make sure that when you're making rubble, they have a footprint.
The footprint will determine whether your models are in or outside of the terrain. In this case, we're using a craft board as our footprint.
Get some cork and arrange them in a rough shape of a house or a room. Grab some liquid nail, lift up the piece of cork, add a bead of liquid nail under the cork, and then push it down into the base. Liquid nail will allow you for a shorter dry time, and it's a lot more firm than other glues.
But it will allow you some flexibility, so you'll have some time to move your object about. This is the end of stage 1. Set it aside. After this, plan your rubble around those walls. Put your rubble down with either PVA or liquid nails. Leave this to dry. This is the end of stage 2.
Now grab your homemade texture paste and add some texture to the rubble and the board. Now leave this to dry, and this is the end of stage 3.
After this, make a dry brush color and do an extremely aggressive dry brush on everything. Leave this to dry.
It won't take long.
This is the end of stage 4. Now your next step is to do an overall black wash. Leave to dry. This is the end of stage 5.
Make a dry brush color. Now dry brush this over the rubble, and your rubble is all done.
Now you can add some tile grout to it to give it a city fight look. The methods will remain the same, but the way you flavor it can be different. Next,
How to get all the graded sand you'll ever need.
cheap and easy. Get all the hobby sand you'll ever need from 2 items. Coarse sand.
And interchangeable sieves.
Get yourself 5 takeaway containers. Sieve the sand.
Largest first. Put the large rocks in the largest. Pour into the next one down.
Change the sieve.
Then go each grade down.
Now, moving on to barricades.
We used disposable wooden utensils to make the base, but you can use anything that you like, so long as it is short and flat.
If you want to copy our result, just get some disposable wooden spoons and then cut off the head.
Now grab some scrap pieces of cork and lay it over the base. Make sure it fits. Lay down a bead of liquid nails and press the cork into the base. Set it aside to dry, and this concludes stage 1.
Get your homemade texture paste and apply it all over the barricade. Set it aside to dry. This concludes stage 2.
Create a light dry brush color and aggressively dry brush over the barricade. And set aside to dry.
This won't take long.
This concludes stage 3.
Do an overall black wash of the barricade. Set aside to dry. This concludes stage 4.
Finally, do a light dry brush and set aside to dry. And that's your barricades done.
You can use some grey tile grout to flavour it as a city fight piece.
The methods will remain the same, but how you flavor it is up to you.
Next,
How to make industrial-sized black wash.
how to
Make industrial-sized black wash. Get a funnel, black ink, disposable shot glasses, varnish, airbrush mixed medium, water,
spoil yourself and get some from the store.
and finally dishwashing soap mixed with water. Get 4 of the shot glasses,
Fill 1 with mixed medium, 1 with varnish, and 2 with water.
and don't forget some of the spray. Don't forget to shake the bottle first.
10 drops of black ink for these 2.
They should look like this,
After mixing, get your funnel and container.
and pour it in.
Don't have enough?
Just repeat the previous steps.
Grab the highest quality miniatures you can.
And test it out. I think it could be darker.
Well, we'll put 15 drops in next time.
Next up,
Fuel pipes. This is a piece that I have wanted to do for a very long time and shown you guys how to do it. Some people will say that it's low effort, other people will think it's genius. But the way to get fuel pipes for this game is to just buy some pressure PVC pipes. Buy some fittings along with it. Cut the long pipe to lengths of your choice. Spray it with some durable aerosol paint and you're done.
you can add any number of flourishes. For example, Rust Effects, Imperial Aquilas, anything goes. It's up to you how you want to flavor it. You can do it as simply as applying a black base prime and then doing a zenithal of steel over top. That's enough to give it all the depth it needs. Remember, this is just simple and quick terrain. Next up,
Battlefield debris. Battlefield debris is simply meant to be line of sight blocking terrain. So it's not meant to be anything specific. So we're not going to give specific instructions as to what you should use for it. Get a kid's toy, spray it up grey, turn it into a statue.
Upcycle some soda cans, add some 3D printed parts, spray it up, and there you have it, some tanks.
Find some interesting textured packaging and then turn it into some sort of line of sight blocking terrain.
While we've given you some pretty specific instructions on how to make terrain thus far, we want you to spread your wings as terrain makers.
Next up, hills.
To make the hills, start off with some foam. We used packaging foam from the last package we received. Now stack them one on top of the other. Use some skewers to secure them into place. Next, grab a Stanley knife or a penknife if you call it that and carve out the hills and the shapes. Once you're happy with the shape, remove the skewers. Next, take some PVA glue, apply a generous coat of the PVA glue between each layer, skewer them in place, and set aside to dry.
Additionally, we had a discussion and perhaps liquid nails might be a better solution than PVA glue.
Because of how porous the foam is, it takes a long time for the PVA glue to dry. In fact, if you are using this method, expect that this part of the project will take the longest to dry.
Of course, it does depend on the foam you're using. We are using packing foam because it was free for us.
Set aside to dry, and this concludes stage 1.
Once it has dried, create a lot of texture paste for this. It doesn't matter what color you choose, but whatever color you choose, make sure to keep it consistent and then apply it over the entire structure. Leave aside to dry. This concludes stage 2.
If you've got flat areas or cliff edges like we do, grab some bark from your local area and bake it to sterilize it. Use liquid nails to stick it on to the flat areas. Set aside to dry. This concludes optional stage 3.
Continuing with the optional stage, paint up your bark in the desired rock color. Set aside to dry. This concludes optional stage 4.
If any of your rocks feel out of place, grab some texture paste from before or create some more and fill in those areas to seamlessly blend them together. Set aside to dry. This concludes optional stage 5.
Hills are often extremely large structures, so if you want some visual variety with your terrain, stipple on some different colors within the same tone, or sponge them. Get colors within the same color family as the color you're using. For example, if you're using brown, use lighter and darker browns, or introduce a color to your base brown. Use random patterning to make this seem natural. Set aside to dry. This concludes optional stage 6.
Create a lighter color of your hills and your rocks and use this as a dry brush and aggressively dry brush across the respective areas. Set aside to dry.
This won't take long.
This concludes stage 7.
After this, do a unifying wash. Unlike an overall wash, use the appropriate colors but wash at the same time. For example, if your rocks are grey, use the black wash, and your ground brown, use the brown wash, but apply them at the same time so that they will mix and pool together. Set aside to dry. This concludes stage 8.
Apply a gentle dry brush over your hills and rocks, and you're done.
However, hills are a natural structure, so this can be where you can really add a great deal of variety. We are using a city fight theme, so we don't want a lot of greenery, but let's say that you do. You can add static grass, flock, or even paper cut plants.
Your hills are only limited by the natural terrain that exists.
And you can even do alien hills if you want.
Next is
Sealed structures.
Sealed structures are structures you cannot enter, so you don't need to bother with creating an interior for them. And because of that, all you need is a box. Boxes that are wider rather than taller are great for this. So things like cat food packet boxes, tea bag boxes, and snack boxes are perfect for this.
Use tape to seal these boxes back up.
Now clad the exterior of the box with any packaging cardboard, also known as paperboard. Cut it up to match the dimensions of the faces of the box, as well as some thin strips. Use super glue to glue the cardboard pieces along the exterior of the box. Next, crimp the thin strips and glue them along the edges of the box.
This helps hide the fact that it is just a box. Next, get your craft paint. Get a cement grey. If you don't have one, make one. Paint the box and set aside to dry. If you can still see the packaging underneath or the colour underneath the cement grey, paint it again. You may need to do this more than once. Set it aside to dry. This concludes stage 1.
Next, mix a mid-tone grey and stipple or sponge it all over the structure. Make sure to leave some of the cement grey showing through from underneath. Set aside to dry, and this concludes stage 2.
Next, add some white to your mid-tone grey to lighten it. Then, stipple or sponge it on, leaving some of the mid and cement grey showing through. Set it aside, and this would conclude the construction of the sealed structures, but
Stopping here would make it just a cement box. What we recommend is to add some greebles to make it seem like a functional structure.
get spare bits from sprues, from broken electronics, or even from toys.
Use these items to create things like doors, power boxes, or even something fantastical, as long as the structure looks like it has a purpose.
Once you have added these parts and they're painted, then your sealed structure is complete. Next, woods. Models and units within this terrain feature are never considered wholly visible. Similarly, if a model must look through or over this terrain feature to draw line of sight to another model, it is considered within cover.
What does that mean?
Both the Citadel Woods and Citadel Wood, the old version, have a footprint which represents a forest. While the current version, the Citadel Woods, creates an imaginary footprint, the old one, which we will be using as our base base template shows a real footprint.
This means that any model that is drawing line of sight through the wood is considered to be obstructed by a multitude of imaginary trees. And because of this, we'll only be representing a few trees, just like the Citadel wood or woods.
First, get 2 pieces of cork tile. Then draw your imaginary template. We suggest a 1/2 foot by a foot.
Any template is fine. We're using the actual Citadel wood. It'll be slightly larger in the end.
Once you have drawn out your template on the first piece of cork, cut it out. Then use that to draw a template on the second piece of cork. Draw around this template up to 1 inch away to a fraction of an inch, or a few centimeters away. This is not an exact science, but just don't make it too close. Once you have done this, rough up your cork to give a rock-like texture to its edges. You do not have to do this everywhere, but where you do not do it, you will cover it with texture paste to give it a flowing soil-like effect.
This will come later. Next, grab your coasters and dry fit them along the topmost layer of your base. Now trace along the edges. Make sure not to get too close to the edge or else it will get too thin. Try to keep it centered. After this, cut out the circles with a knife.
If you plan to make a lot of these woods, say for a shop or a club, you can use a hole saw drill bit. This will make the project more expensive, but you will save a lot of time.
Next, dry fit your top layer onto the bottom layer. Once you're happy with the position, trace along the edges of the top layer to mark out the position. Next, apply a generous coat of PVA glue and glue the 2 layers together. Now with the excess glue, use a brush to brush it over the entire base to seal the pores in. This will make painting a lot easier later on. It is extremely important not to leave any excess glue within the holes of your top layer. This will make it really hard for the coasters to fit afterwards. Now set aside to dry. This concludes stage 1.
Next, get some grey craft paint and then paint in all of the rock areas. Set aside to dry. This concludes stage 2. Next, make up some brown texture paste and then apply it to all of the areas where you do not have the rock color. Not the holes though, you need those kept clear. So if some excess texture paint has fallen in, be careful to clean it up. Set aside to dry. This concludes stage 3.
Next is an optional stage. Stipple or sponge some different tones of browns onto the soil section to create some visual variety. Set aside to dry. This concludes stage 4. Next, create some lighter colors for both your soil and your rocks and aggressively dry brush over the respective areas. Set aside to dry.
This won't take long.
This concludes stage 5.
Next, give a unifying wash by washing the soil area with a brown color and the rocks with a black color at the same time. If they pool into one another or mix, this does not matter because it is a unifying wash. Set aside to dry. This concludes stage 6.
Grab the tones that you created earlier for dry brushing and gently dry brush over the entire piece on the respective areas. And that's it, your wood's footprint is complete. Your woods are only limited by the natural terrain that exists. Use flock or ground cover to make them more flavorful and interesting.
You can even make alien woods.
We flavored ours to be like a city fight, so we added some grey tile grout afterwards.
Your next step is to make the trees themselves. Now, obviously, you're going to base these on the coasters that we prepared earlier. Whatever steps you used for your wood's footprint, you're going to repeat them here. But first, let's get your trees. You can use aquarium plants, pre-made trees, or natural elements to make your trees.
These natural elements can be sticks, branches, or even roots. In our case, we used an invasive weed.
We uprooted it, dried it out, and then baked it in the oven. You do this to get rid of any harmful natural elements such as fungi. Then we simply cut off the root to make our tree.
Any and all of these methods of making trees are valid.
Often you are going to want to glue your tree through the cork coaster. This may simply mean pinning it like you would a model, or it might mean drilling a hole or tearing a hole through the coaster to fit your tree through. After this, cut off any excess and make sure that the bottom of your coaster is flush.
If you want to keep your tree making process cheap and easy, make sure to keep the project simple. This means limiting the materials you use to limit the expense. Avoid painting and crafting your own trees and use natural materials instead.
While any method of making trees that gives a good result is valid, just keep in mind if you use a very expensive method, you're going to go against the spirit of this project. So keep that in mind.
Now we'll move on to making the bare base.
What's the bare base?
The bare base is the base that you will use in replacement of the trees.
Why would we even have to remove the trees?
Well, if you're following the old world rules, you might want to have your formation move through the woods, so you might need to remove some of the trees to let this happen. Remember, your models can move through and over these trees, but that can't be represented on the tabletop.
Why don't we just use the holes?
You could, but that would look pretty ugly. Some larger models may not be able to fit into these holes and become unbalanced. These replacement tiles can also be used as objective markers. And that completes your woods.
We would like to point out the diversity of this particular piece of terrain and how you can use it.
Just because you're using the woods rule doesn't mean you have to limit yourself to just making forest terrain. You could make it like a factory, plasma silos, or even a destroyed museum.
All that is required for it to be a woods is for it to be semi-permeable, meaning you can see through it, but it blocks some of your line of sight. So long as the terrain fits this description, you can use it as a woods within 40k.
And remember those removable bases? They actually fulfill two roles. You can use them as part of your woods or battlefield debris. So go ahead, get creative.
Next.
How to make industrial-sized brown wash.
How to?
Make industrial-sized brown wash.
G'day.
Funnel, burnt umber ink, burnt sienna ink, disposable shot glasses, varnish, airbrush mix medium, water,
Spoil yourself and get some from the store.
and finally dishwashing soap mixed with water. Get 4 of the shot glasses,
Fill 1 with mixed medium, 1 with varnish, and 2 with water.
and don't forget some of the spray.
Put 10 drops of
Burnt umber,
in the varnish and 10 drops of
burnt sienna
in the mixed medium. They should look like this.
after mixing,
Your funnel and your container.
and pour it in.
Don't have enough?
Just repeat the previous steps and test it out. I think it could be darker,
Okay, let's try another formula. Same as before,
but we're going to add a burnt umber in here.
and a black in here.
Yeah, put it into the same mix as before.
This looks like Seraphim Sapia.
And that looks like Agrac's Earthship.
Next. Ruins. Ruins will have more optional steps than many of the other terrain featured here. Just remember that many of these steps are optional, and we will tell you which. But remember, they are optional.
First, get 3 spare sprues.
Spare sprues?
Yes, sprues that you've clipped all the model parts from. Clip the sprues until it lies flat.
What do you mean flat?
Until a piece of cardboard can lie flat over the sprue. Next, glue the sprues together in the shape of an L. You may wish to use sprue glue on top of plastic glue to strengthen the structure. Now set aside to dry. This concludes stage 1.
Next, you will notice that one of the sprues far exceeds the other. You will want to clip this sprue until it is in alignment with the base sprue. That is the sprue on the bottom. After this, with the short and long sprues, these are the sprues protruding from the base, create an imaginary line and then clip along that line until your sprue conforms to it. After this, find some regular packaging cardboard. Cut that cardboard until it conforms to the shape of the sprues and then glue it to the sprues. Using super glue should do the trick. After this, your sprues should still be exposed. Next, clad the edges in cardboard to hide the corners. Keep the sprues exposed.
Next is optional stage 3. You can drill some holes into the sprue and clip up some bits of paperclip and insert them into the holes with super glue to create the look of rebar.
After this, paint your entire structure in cement grey. This may take several coats. Set aside to dry. This completes stage 2.
Next is optional stage 4. Stipple or sponge on a medium grey onto the cardboard, leaving some of the cement grey showing through. Set aside to dry. This completes optional stage 4. Next is optional stage 5. Stipple or sponge on a lighter grey, leaving some of the medium grey and cement grey showing through. Set aside to dry. This concludes optional stage 5.
Next is stage 6. Get a craft board or a sturdy base. Originally, we used super glue and PVA. However, we do not think that this is the best way. The best way is to use liquid nails and then to hold the structure down until it feels glued in place. Set aside to dry. This concludes stage 6. Once your base is securely in place, now get your texture paste and apply it along the edges of the sprue. Make sure if you have rebar that it will still show through. If you wish to add height to your structure so that your models can fire from cover, now is the time. If you need to create a significant level of height First, crumple up some alfoil and then glue it to that area to create height. Next, use spare cork and other rubble to add to the structure to hide your alfoil. Glue these down, set aside to dry. This concludes stage 7.
Next, add texture paste to any exposed areas. Set aside to dry. This concludes stage 8. Now, aggressively dry brush over all of the textured areas with a light gray. Set aside to dry.
This won't take long.
This concludes stage 9. Now give an overall black wash over the textured areas. Set aside to dry. This concludes stage 10. Now give a light dry brush of the light gray over the washed areas. Set aside to dry. This concludes stage 11.
Next is optional stage 12. Get your black wash and streak it down the sprue structure. This will give the idea that it's weathered. Set aside to dry.
This won't take long, especially because you want light streaks.
This concludes optional stage 12. Optional stage 13. For lucky number 13, add graffiti to your building.
You can do this by simply using different colored marker pens.
Or you can use graffiti stencils if you have them.
Just remember that graffiti is often layered over one another.
But we're not trying for realism here, but the feeling of realism. Remember, this is cheap, quick, and easy. This is the end of optional stage 13.
Next, touch up anything that looks out of place and then add on your tile grout.
Isn't that meant to be optional?
Sure, but adding tile grout will really make a city fight look realistic. And now your ruins are complete.
Next,
Project
project planning.
planning.
There's an old adage. It goes like this: cheap, quick, good. Pick 2, go. It is meant to be said in this manner because this is how you conduct business. You can only choose 2 of 3 options: cheap, quick, or good.
This project has a working name of Make a Table Full of Terrain Cheap, Quick, and Easy.
So obviously, we have chosen cheap and quick.
Yeah, because with this project, there are lots of things that you can do to make it extra special with lots of other flourishes, but you'll find that when you start to do these things start to add up and it can quickly become quite expensive.
Unless you're doing a lot of it, I don't think that the expense is the major issue, but I think that time is the major issue when you want to make it look better.
Yes, because the thing that we struggle the most with is prep time and dry time.
In fact, I think that you could do this entire project in 8 hours if you just had everything prepared.
That means having all of your materials purchased and prepped.
Some of the times it's just smaller things, like, for example, having your cardboard cut up so that you can use it immediately.
Or keeping your workstation nice and organized.
Yeah, I kind of turned the living room into a disaster zone.
Yeah.
Honestly, this has been the only things that has slowed us down. That, and we did some of this stuff on the live streams, and that means we weren't recording it on the right quality phone.
Yeah, and that means we have to re-record some of the steps.
But you don't have to put aside a big block of time to do this. You can just do one project at a time. For example, Craters is quick and easy just so long as you put it aside each time.
You could spend less than an hour each day throughout a week and have a table full of craters.
In fact, that would be an ideal way to do this project. Simply do one stage, set it aside to dry, move on to another step and set that aside to dry and be done that day. Just 2 steps of each project, and by the end of the week, you'll have the entire project done.
The biggest issue for us was dry time, mostly because of the weather. It's winter time right now and the weather wasn't great and we don't have a lot of sunshine to dry everything out. But remember to keep in mind exactly why you are doing this project in the first place, which leads us to our next topic,
Aesthetics.
If you don't like the city theme, that's completely fine. You don't have to limit yourself to just that concept. For the sake of example, we're going to show you another project that we did that follows pretty much the exact same steps, which is a more natural theme.
This is based off the Japanese countryside for a game called Bushido. This is where I got the method for making the trees. The only difference is I don't have that bottom base.
You mean the 2-tier base?
Yes. So all of the steps for this are exactly the same, but it's just those end bits which are different, where I put on, for example, homemade forest floor scatter, static grass, and tufts. Just by editing a few of those end steps, you can really change this theme.
You can use these base steps to make pretty much any type of terrain you want.
And depending on the popularity of this video, we may just do that.
Now let's move on to
Purpose.
If you're making this terrain just because you want to make something, all good. But if you're going to do something just because you want to create something, then might as well make it look good. So keep a lookout on the channel because we will show you how to elevate some of this stuff. But that goes against the spirit of this project, which is to do it cheap, quick, and easy. But the steps shown here are for general purpose and it's a great base. If you're doing this for casual play, just remember that your players will like variety over one good project. They may use that one good project and everything, but remember, your time matters.
The final part of purpose requires a section of its own.
Tournaments.
We referenced a Warhammer community post at the start of this, but we are going to reference another Warhammer community post.
This community post is by MetaWatch and it's about creating balanced terrain for tournament play.
As such, it features one piece of terrain over all others, large ruins.
These large ruins are open squares missing their back section. Because of this, we recommend modifying our ruin design by simply adding an extra sprue.
This extra section isn't necessary but will make it easier if you are making terrain specifically for tournaments. You can just simply add a line of sight blocking piece of terrain to complete this open square with the L-shaped design. This can be done with battlefield debris or with the barricades.
Craters and ruins are great for terrain type 2. You may need to combine several craters together to get the desired coverage.
Remember that you can combine your terrain to get the traits that you desire. Just remember to fit your terrain to your purpose.
If you're creating for a shop, club, or tournament, just remember you'll have different goals to that of a casual hobbyist. Next, final notes.
If you are planning to do this as a big project, it is very important to plan it out.
Life has a way of taking our time, so proper planning is really important.
The biggest thing that held us back with this project was simply dry time.
If you've got a chaotic schedule, try doing one project at a time.
It's your hobby, but if it's taking over the living room, the kitchen, and a bedroom, then you need to organize.
Not that Cal would know from experience.
Sunny! How dare you reveal my secrets?
Not a secret if it's on the live stream.
If you like what we do, please support us here on YouTube or on Ko-Fi. You can gain access to the Discord for just $2 a month.
We'll post audios, gain feedback from you, and occasionally chat in the lounge.
And as always, keep those brushes wet. Bye-bye. Or if you have them, graffiti stencils.
Them graffiti stencils from Waypan, yo!
Oh my god, please
Let's
stop.
start a hip-hop channel, yeah!
No. More honestly, I really do hope that this one takes off because we put a lot into it and we finally got that tripod so we can actually record things.
And I think of all the sort of terrain stuff that we have done, even for commissions, and we didn't film any of it. I think this was one of the most simplest terrain projects that I personally have done with you. And I think it could really benefit our audience.
Yeah, well, I really liked the Bushido terrain project I did with you. And, I think that, hopefully people can get some benefit out of it. I think this is the risk of being, a hobby YouTube channel because... You put in 2 weeks into something like this, but some of the times our lore videos will get more views than this and we can do them in a day. And the high effort stuff just won't get as many views. So I'm really hoping for this one.
Yeah, so we hope you guys enjoyed this one. And if you do actually recreate some of these steps, please come onto our Waypan Facebook group and share with us your results. We'd love to see them.
Oh, yeah, and, join us as members and stuff.
Yes, the membership and stuff.
Yeah. Have a good one, guys.
Bye-bye.
See ya.